Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second session of our new podcast where we demystify everything about fine wine investing. Today, I'm joined by Mesias Alfeus. He is an associate professor at the University of Stellenbosch and the co-author of the white paper called South African Fine Wine Investment, a case study for emerging markets. Welcome, Mesias. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Ipo, for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you and to unpack this subject on South African fine wine as an alternative asset class.
No, definitely, Messias. And not to waste any time, let's just get into it. Can you tell us about your background, Messias, and what made you write this white paper? Fine.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm from Namibia. I studied
Yeah.
mathematics and I went into quantitative finance, which means you applied mathematical techniques to
Mm,
solve problems that arises in finance. So I did my PhD from the University of Technology in Sydney, and my
mm,
PhD was about stochastic modeling of new phenomena. Phenomena
mm.
means is new risk or new behavior in the financial market.
Yeah.
So, and then I came back to South Africa. I'm currently at the Stellenbosch University where I'm doing research in financial risk management. Then
Mm,
I found out that I'm actually well positioned because I'm in Stellenbosch University and Stellenbosch is in Stellenbosch, which is a wineland. And I
yeah.
wanted to find a new area where I can apply my mathematical models to see
Mm,
if South African wine, which is an illiquid asset, can be classified as a diversifiable asset. And then I went on to look on internet to see if there are South African wine index, but I couldn't
mm,
find any South African wine index. And I also went on to explore the website of LifeX100, which track the performance of the top 100 global benchmark wines, but I
mm,
couldn't also see any single South African fine wine. Then I gave a project to my honor students to work on creating up using some financial econometric models to create up this index for South Africa and then
mm,
also show that this South African wine index is actually a diversifiable asset. That means it can reduce, if you put it in a portfolio of top performing index, it can actually reduce your risk or meaning which is measured by the volatility. And then it
mm.
can also increase your expected growth rate or your expected return in that portfolio. And this is what we have done up until this stage.
Mm. No, that's honestly awesome to hear, Messias. I think that's such a beautiful thing to say in terms of you see when you actually want to do research about something and actually you saw a problem and then you actually just wanted to go deep into it and solve it. I think that's such a beautiful mission, CS, because most people don't even know you can invest in fine wine. So
Yeah.
it really does take certain things to make you interested in seeing a certain field and then just going down a rabbit hole to see if it's actually viable. So that's actually beautiful to hear,
Yeah.
Messiah. I know the paper evaluates whether South African fine wine can be a viable alternative investment asset. So, can I ask what was the main aim or goal of the paper?
Yeah. So, first of all, the paper was mainly to create up the first South African fine
Mm,
wine index, and then we partner with Strauss and Co. and Wine Cellar from Cape Town, which is
mm,
the only option of house wine house in Africa, and these are the one that actually gave us the data for the wine about 30 from 30 data point from 30 wineries, and then
mm,
we needed to sort of do sort of like data cleaning to see which actually of these wines are top performing and the liquidity is available is good enough to make sure that we come up with a representative index. So now we came up with a top 10 South African wine, which we use it in an econometric study in
mm,
order for us to be able to create up this index. And that's why we call it, it's a South African fine wine 10, meaning which is depending on the top 10 South African best performing wines. Performing means they have a good rating from the wine advocate in South Africa, which is Tim Atkins, and also
mm,
their values is good representative, and also the liquidity. That means how often are this wine being sold, so that we can come up with a most representative index for South Secondly, after creating up this index, so we wanted to now check to do an empirical studies that actually to provide empirical evidence that this fine wine index is actually a diversifiable. Those are the two main goals of this paper. And then we use sort of some mathematical finance model approach, and then we show that actually this South African fine wine index can be comparable to the LACX 100, which is a benchmark wine index in the global stage.
No, that's great to hear, Messias. And I remember from reading the paper, one thing I did read about were the metrics analyzed, and I saw that you did analyze a lot of metrics, including the Sharpe ratio, the maximum drawdown, if I'm not mistaken. So, if you care to explain what does each metric means for like the average investor who wants to do the research to South African Fine Wine Index. So, what does each metric stand for, and how does wine do better in those metrics than the South
Yeah.
African wine do better than other assets?
Well, okay, well, to create up a portfolio, so now you want now to construct up metrics that actually provide empirical evidence that this actually having wine in your portfolio actually increase your Sharpe ratio. So Sharpe ratio, so that means you go to the central bank, then you choose the interest rate or risk-free interest rate, and then we measure now the deviation from the expected return of a portfolio over your standard deviation of a portfolio. So what you want to see is you want to see your Sharpe ratio as bigger, as maximum as possible. And then also with other metrics, we also found out that actually including this South African wine index in your portfolio actually maximize all your metrics. And actually that's a good starting point to focus really on the research that focus on taking South African fine wine as an alternative asset class for investment. And our study actually points toward that if you really want to maximize your expected return of a portfolio, I mean, consider investing in this South African fine wine index, which is
No, that's awesome, because when I read the paper, it's really good to have metrics like that to actually measure against other asset classes. Because I do believe, in terms of institutionalizing fine wine as an asset, you really do need comparative data. So having that kind of data where every kind of metric is measured against the asset classes that you used, which was, if I'm not mistaken, the JSE All Share, which was there, and comparing to equities and bonds, it was really good to see. So can you please tell me, Mesias, so the SAFW10, we know it consists of the top 10 South African wines. What was the selection process based on?
okay. Well, like I said, we got quite a lot of data. So, but now we want to make sure that the wines that we're going to include it in the econometric analysis for the creation of the indexes are well representative as far as possible. So we consider the 5-year average of the Tim Akin, who rates every year. He do the rating of the wines, and then so that's the advocate, Tim Atkins, and then also we look at the prices of the wines. Some wines are just so much ridiculously priced, and as a result of that, the liquidity is not as much. The volume of the wine that are being sold within a year is not that good enough. And then we consider all these three criteria: so liquidity, the price, as well as the average, the 5-year average Tim Akin. And then we filter the data, and then we choose the top 10 wines. And these are the wines that we have used in econometric studies to create up an index. And then we use this econometric study, which is called the repeat sale regression. But now in some of my following studies, now we use the hybrid approach, in which we consider the handonic and then also repeat sale regression into one approach. And then that's why it's called the hybrid approach, in order to create up an index. But I mean also we found out that actually our index is actually a representative index. And then most studies actually follows up where we use even machine learning in order to create an index, to use even some more sophisticated mathematical approach in order to come up with an index. But this index is already been updated every 3 months.
No, that's awesome to hear, Messias. Because one thing, as I said, there's a lot of voices in the fine wine industry, and there's a lot of narratives that they're pushing that are false. So it's really important to have papers like yours that demystify and use actual data to actually show us what are the true benefits of fine wine. So just to carry on from there, I just want to ask you from the paper, what were your key findings of the SAFW10 compared to the other indices from the paper? Yeah, what were your key findings in the paper?
Okay, well, first of all, I mean, I was very fascinated to see that although the liquidity is not that highest as compared to the top performing assets
Mm,
in the world, on the global stage, I was fascinated to see that South African wine index, this index actually stood out, even can be comparable to the benchmark wine index, which is a LifeX. And then
mm.
also, I mean, it's even performing well compared to gold and all other top performing assets. And this is a motivation to really look into futures, like what are the assets that we can consider maybe creating up a derivative on this South African wine, or maybe create up things like futures, for instance, or maybe looking at what South African fine wine index can offer into your diversity.
No, no, definitely, Messias. I do want to say thank you for your time because and your work, Messias, because when you talk to a lot of people, we you always hear about investment regions. You always hear about the France and the Italies and the Napa valleys in the US, and those are considered the only investment regions. But through your work, it and through your work, it just shows that South Africa does have investment grade wines that people can invest in, and yeah, I'm really appreciative of the work you've done, Messias, because I do think through the data approach, it really does bring a lot of credibility to the South African fine wine market, and through the metrics and the data, it does bring a lot of transparency into the market. So I do suggest everyone to go read your paper if they want really do want to invest in fine wine. So no, I do want to say thank you so much for your time, Messias, because this was really insightful. And yeah, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, no, thanks, Sylvia, for having me and for your interest in my papers. I'm really fascinated about this kind of research, and in fact, that combining finance, math,
Mm,
and wine is things that are close to my heart. And it's always a pleasure working on this subject because I mean, having to do research over a glass of red wine is one of the best adventure I've ever had. So, and it's not a fun exercise, fun research, but it's also something to see the
mm,
output of the result. Some of
mm,
our papers has been already published in peer-reviewed journal, and
mm,
most of the academic community really appreciate these areas of studies, especially considering the emerging market, to show that the South African
mm,
wine index actually stood out.
mm,
And what I really wanted to my thesis is that if you attend many global conferences, they will tell you about South African wine is good for drinking. But what I'm trying to say is South African wine is definitely undervalued, but it's not only good for drinking, but my message is that it's also
mm,
a very alternative investment asset class. And like with Roland Pins and we are working on creating up some vehicle for it's an alternative investment. So yeah, I would encourage people to have a look at our work on South African Fine Wine Index, especially for those who want to consider wine as an alternative investment.
Definitely, Messias, because through your paper, South African fine wine can be studied and it can be compared in global research. And this does institutionalize fine wine. And I do think that's a goal because a lot of people, there's a lot of data on the public markets in terms of equities and bonds. And I do think fine wine is still pretty much opaque in some ways. So having papers like yours, it really does demystify through data, of course. It really does demystify what actually happens in the market and what actually is good and the challenges and the risks and the real benefits instead of actual funds and scammers really just sharing false narratives. So no, I really do want to say thank you again, Messias, and I'm really looking forward to your other work that's coming ahead. I'm super excited. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.